Good morning. I am Reshma. Today I am here to explain a poem, The Daffodils, for the class BA B.Ed second year, paper 2, unit 2. The Daffodils by William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth was a 19th century literary poet. He was the most influential pioneer of English Romantic poetry. Pioneer is a beginner. He lost both his parents at an very early age, and he began to write poetries when he was at school. As a young man, Wordsworth developed a love for nature. His themes are reflected in his poems. While studying at Cambridge University, Wordsworth spent summer holidays on a walking tour in Switzerland and France. And he became an enthusiastic for the ideals of the French Revolution. It means he did not take part in the French Revolution, but he used to give them good ideas, or he used to take their ideas. So he became ideals for them. Wordsworth had a good friend, Taylor Coleridge, who was another famous English writer. They both collaborated and wrote a great collection of poems titled Lyrical Ballads. And one of the famous poems written by Coleridge, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, is among that. Wordsworth had written a great autobiographical poem, The Prelude, which was published after his death. The Excursion, Ode to Imitations of Immortality, The Solitary Reaper, The Pastoral Poem, etc. are a few to name the poems from his literary works. Daffodils. The Daffodils is a poem which describes his love for nature. As the poem starts, I wandered lonely as a cloud. It is one of the best lines by which the poem can be started. It was first published in 2 volumes and then written separately. Actually, the writer or William Wordsworth had lost his brother John, and this led him to loneliness. So thus the poem is, we can say, the result of his loneliness, or a result of his imagination and a good actual visualization. Like he has seen nature, he has tried to overcome from the grief of the loss of his brother. So that is why at times we see he himself is lost, or the words which he has written show that the poet himself is lost in the nature. The poet, so to explain the summary of the poem, Daffodils. The poet or the speaker in this poem says that once, while wandering like a cloud floating above hills and valleys, Now, the first line itself, how can one wander like a cloud float above the hills and valleys? All these lines uh, explain that he was trying to visualize life, or he was trying to bring his life on a original track. He says, as once I was doing all this wandering like a cloud, I came across a field of daffodils. Daffodil is a flower. I came across a field of daffodils beside a lake. They dancing, fluttering flowers. How were the daffodils? Like they were all dancing. How were they dancing? Because the wind was blowing. They were dancing, fluttering flowers stretched endlessly along the floor. They stretched, it means the sight till where you could see, you could just see the flowers only along the shore and through the shiny waves of the lakes beside danced the flowers, and the daffodils outdid the waters with their beauty. Outdid is to do something better than the other person. You try to outdo somebody, that is, you try to show that you are more better than somebody or you are more successful than somebody. So here the daffodils tried to outdo the water, tried to outdo the beauty of water. The poet says that the golden daffodils, they were all golden, yellowish in color. The golden yellow daffodils, they twinkled and stretched in a continuous line, just like the stars in a Milky Way galaxy, for putting a greater implication in indicating that the flowers are heavenly as stars. Now here he compares the flowers as stars. He say, like in the Milky Way, how in the Milky Way galaxy, how the stars are twinkling. Similarly, that way these flowers were all spread on the earth. He seems the endless view of the golden daffodils as a never-ending line. He says they are never going to end. Now here he uses an exaggeration, that the number saying 10,000 I saw at a glance. Exaggeration is something बढ़ा चढ़ा के बताना. He just says 10,000 I saw at a glance, indicates that he had never seen so many daffodils at once. And the poet was very helpful, very joyful that he could not hide his happiness in the company of flowers. Now here it was just the small flower daffodils gave him such a pleasure, such a happiness. He says that he stared and stared, that he kept on looking and looking at the flowers, and he did not realize what wealth the scene would bring him. Now, wealth is something, money, treasure, but here he was not thinking of all that. It was only the heavenly treasure that the daffodils, the scene of daffodils were bringing to his eyes. He was saying, for now, whenever he feels vacant, vacant is empty or pensive. Pensive is because, as I told you, he has lost his brother. Maybe sometimes he will think about it, he will feel lonely. So he says, whenever he will feel empty, lonely, or pensive, that is thoughtfulness, in a sad mood, the memories, maybe some memories will strike in the inward eyes, in his mind, this blissful sight of the daffodils will bring pleasure to his heart. So he says the daffodils were, the sight of the daffodils are going to bring pleasure to his hearts, and that is how the daffodils were dancing. So this is just, you can say, a simple poem, but the way the poet has described the daffodils is something great. Now the critical analysis. In this poem, it reads a piece of memory which is deep in the poet's heart. He praises the beauty of the daffodils, which leaves a lasting impression on him. He said they are going to leave a lasting impression on him. Whenever he will be vacant, his heart will be in a sad mood. The sight of the daffodils is going to fill his heart with pleasure. The poem is divided into 4 stanzas with the subjects of nature and memory, which are close to the hearts of all the romantic poets. The 4 stanzas are 6-lined stanzas. In the poem, the poet tells us that what he observed and experienced while walking through the hills and valleys one day. He was lonely and melancholy. Melancholy is feeling sadness which lasted for a long time. But suddenly, as he passed a lake, he noticed a cluster of yellow daffodils waving in the breeze. It was like they were all dancing. This wasn't just an isolated or scattered patch of daffodils. There were thousands and thousands of them, what he saw dancing in the breeze. So the speaker's or the writer's loneliness was replaced by sheer joy of seeing this lovely spectacle. Spectacle is scenario, and its impact was strong enough to become a piece of memory which he would recall in the future and as a fondly gift of nature. He says now whenever he will feel depressed, he just thinks of the daffodils and his heart fills with joy. The poem starts with the description of himself, saying that as a cloud he was flowing over the hills. This presents the idea of seclusion. Seclusion is the state of being private and away from people, because he was in a sad mood. He wanted to be alone, but again it is contradicted in the face crowd. As he saw the group or the bunches of daffodils, it is contradicted, saying the word crowd. The feeling of ecstasy, that is great happiness, suddenly makes a great drive in the poem. The plot of the poem is very simple. The poet is just wandering and discovering the field of daffodils by the lake, and the memory makes him very pleasing and comforts him when he is lonely, bored, or restless. The characterization of the sudden occurrence of a memory daffodils is given in the line flash upon the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. Bliss is something which is blessed. It is psychologically acute, and it is explained in a very good way. So here the poet has very finely explained about his feelings and the feelings when he saw the daffodils and what is going to happen whenever he feels sad or he is vacant, his mind or his eyes will be full with a flash upon the inward eye or the bliss of solitude. So this is